Hello and welcome to Autistic FM. My name is Haje and I use he, him pronouns. I'm your host on this journey. You can subscribe to Autistic FM wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find the transcripts and additional information about each episode on autistic.fm. All right, today's guest is Sofi Elkin. Sofi is a thoughtful and candid communicator who has shared her journey through discovering her neurodivergence as an adult and learning how to communicate openly with her partner. In this episode, Sophie shares the insights and challenges of building authentic relationships as an unmasked autistic person, from handling conflict and emotional regulation to setting healthy boundaries and practicing active listening. Sophie's experiences offer invaluable guidance to anybody navigating the nuances of communication in a neurodivergent relationship. I absolutely love this episode. Let's roll tape. Hello, it's so good to have you here. Could we start with your name and your pronouns, please?
Yes, my name is Sofi Elkin, pronouns she, they.
Awesome. Where in the world are you?
I'm in Baltimore, Maryland.
Is it like all beautiful and fall like?
Very, very much so. Yeah, I'm cold.
I miss seasons. I live in California. We don't have seasons. We have sunny
Oh,
or slightly rainy. It's not-
yeah, that's how
it's
it was growing up for me. Yeah.
um so I'm curious, when did you realize you might be neurodivergent?
Yeah, I didn't until I was an adult. When I was in college, around 25, 26, I started realizing like, okay, I might be ADHD. And I went and got that diagnosis done, but autism wasn't even on my radar until I was 28,
Mhm.
after college. Yeah.
May I ask how old you are now?
31.
Okay, so it's been a few years.
Mhm.
Interesting. The reason I really wanted to invite you on the podcast is that you've said a lot of really interesting things in various social media channels about communication in your relationship in particular.
Mhm.
And I like whenever I talk to people, like getting clear and good communication that works for everybody seems like incredibly hard. How do you describe your communication in your relationship?
Yeah, so it wasn't that easy at first, and my husband already also knew he had ADHD, but also, like, wasn't sure if he had autism or anything, so we didn't begin our relationship by, modeling healthy communication style that worked for both of us because we didn't even know we needed that at the time.
Hmm.
And so we've had to kind of grow together into that as we both have learned more about ourselves throughout our relationship, and found out ways in which we were masking when communicating with other people, and those communications left us drained of energy. And so we had to literally come together and be like, okay, what works for both of us best, and we need to throw away any expectations that we had previously.
How did communication challenges show up for you?
Yeah, so he grew up with a very different kind of parenting style than me, and both harmed us in a way, in different ways. My mom uses very passive and passive aggressive communication, and so that's what I learned as well. And then he had a parent that used more aggressive communication. Neither of us was really modeled like just direct, almost like neutral communication styles. And so challenges that we had was that we communicated in a different way, and neither was a way that worked for either of us. And so sometimes when he would say something, I was reading into what he was saying because I grew up with, again, that passive aggressive communication. So I would be like, "Are you trying to say this instead?" And he's like, "No." Whereas with me, sometimes he would be like too harsh and too like just didn't even think, like, I was used to sugar-coated things, and he does not sugarcoat, so it at first, it was like a clash.
Did that get hard enough that you guys thought, maybe we aren't compatible? Or was it always like, we'll figure this out one way or the other?
Yeah, I think I at least on my end, I've definitely had questions of, like, does that make us compatible? But I think, yeah, again, it's learning that we both actually do need and can have the same type of communication. We were like, "Oh, it's not about compatibility, it's that we are just neurodivergent. We just have a different brain than
Right.
we thought we did." Yeah.
Right. But I mean, you have to get to a place of particularly good empathy for the other person to realize, okay, like the way the framework I'm trying to use is like when somebody says something to me that is like hurts me, I'm like, wait a minute, they probably didn't mean to hurt me. Let's start there. And then from there, okay, they probably mean to look after me and they want the best for me. So knowing those things, how can I make sense of what they just said? I
Right.
spent so much time trying to kind of process. Um, but it sounds like you guys found a way of asking clarifying questions. Is that a tool that you guys are using a lot, or?
Yes, one of the things we do for sure is, say, like, if I said, "Hey, can you take the trash out?" And he says as a tone or is, like, not sure if I'm trying to really say, "Hey, you haven't taken the trash out yet. I'm upset with you about this. Can you take the trash out?" He will just ask me, "Hey, was there are you upset? Did you mean something else by that?" And so that then I can be like, "Oh, no, I really just meant, can you take the trash out?" And then he's like, "Cool." So, yeah.
Right. Well, what a beautiful thing though, instead of like, and that sounds like you guys are securely attached enough to be able to go, "Oh yeah, we can just double check in with that," rather than him grabbing the trash bag and walking outside and wondering if the door's gonna be locked when he comes back kind of thing.
Right, but again, it wasn't always like this. Definitely, we
Mhm.
had a couple of years of struggle at the beginning in which we were not communicating well. So it took a lot of work to get here.
Yeah. What did that work look like?
We've been in couples therapy twice, and the second time we did make sure we got a therapist that was like neuro affirming so that they understood that our communication style was going to be different and that we didn't want to go into this and be told, "Oh, you're just not saying it politely enough," or whatever. We try to do as much as possible weekly check-ins where we sit down once a week and just say like, what went well this week, what didn't, like, did I do anything that bothered you this week? Is there anything you're grateful for that I did this week? And so on. And during that, sometimes that's when we discuss that kind of stuff. Like, oh, you did say this, and but it took a lot of work. And at the beginning, there was a lot of resentment and anger around, again, communicating wrongly. So I guess it is a testament to we really love each other because we stuck it out. But it was not easy. Yeah.
Yeah. But I suppose that's a payoff you get for the rest of your life or for your rest of your relationship. Um,
That exactly.
that is beautiful, right? You kind of customize your lives to each other, which is really beautiful.
Yeah. And the way I saw it, every time I had that thought of, are we just not compatible? I was just like, well, I can get rid of this relationship because I think we're not compatible, but then I'm going to just have to start over with someone else and do the exact same thing because what are the odds that everybody has the exact same communication style? That's not how life works. Why don't I do that with the person I'm already with and I love?
Love hearing that. I've been through some relationships wobbles myself recently, and like being able to turn toward each other and go, "Hey, you're my person.
Mhm.
This is real. Let's keep going." But it's for me, it's hard when I'm in the middle of like a. I'm just waving my arms in the air. I think you
Yeah.
know exactly what I mean.
Yes. Call it a mentee be.
Yeah, exactly. And so how does your partner support you? If he notices that you are dysregulated and not fully present with you during a hard conversation.
Yeah, my partner's the type of person that needs space sometimes during a conversation. He needs to walk away from it and like cool off. Um, and I'm usually the kind of person that wants to just sit there and work it out before I move forward. And
Mhm,
so we've had to also adapt to each other in that way. And he knows when I'm dysregulated, I need to talk through it. Whereas if he would shut down and like go be alone, I need to like word vomit about what's going on in my head. And so
mhm,
even if I'm dysregulated because of something he did or because we're arguing, he will just like say, okay, I can tell that you're upset. He lets me just vent to him and just
mhm.
use him as like a sounding board.
When you are like you described this as word vomiting. If when you are like wording all over someone, is that your way to figure out your own thoughts and feelings as well?
Yes,
Is that part
absolutely.
of the processing?
Yes, it's me externally processing my thoughts and feelings. Exactly.
Mhm. And do you get greater clarity when that happens?
Yes. And I even do it if nobody's around, I'll do it just by myself out loud or do a voice note or something because yeah, after I say it all, process it through saying it, I'm like,
Right.
oh. Yeah.
Doing that with a partner feels like an incredibly intimate and vulnerable thing to do. Like if you haven't fully figured out your shit yet, and you're kind of shaping your thoughts and feelings live with someone, that feels like beautiful intimacy.
Yeah. The truth is that I've never been able to control doing that very well. So in all past relationships, I've just scared the person off because I didn't hold back and they still did that. But then most people are like, okay, that's a little intense. That's um So it's just something that I can't really hold back when I'm either upset or really excited or whatever it is, and just like have all these thoughts and feelings. Yeah, I just like need to say it out loud. And I do
Mhm.
think it's alienated partners and friends, but that's probably for the best.
Yeah, I think there's an aspect there, right? Like if somebody can't handle it, well,
Yeah,
there's a friend of mine who at some point said, "If I'm too much for you, go find less." I was like, "That's
that's
seems
right.
fair."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can like your partner or your close friends help support like better communication with you?
Yeah. I think friends and partners of people with autism, especially, it's really good to just ask that person instead of assume. I think even within the neurodivergent community, we all communicate a little bit differently. I think there's a general agreement that we like direct communication, but like beyond that, you want to just ask the person. So I like when my friends, or if I bring something up and I say like, "Hey, I didn't like the way you communicated this to me." I like when they can ask questions like, "Oh, what would be a better way?" And
Hmm.
try to figure out how Sophie likes to be communicated with, not just a general autistic person, because we are just all different.
Yeah, totally. Do you ever give people like literally exactly the words that you need to hear?
Yes, I've done that, especially with my partner.
Yeah. It's like the first time that happened to me, I was like, wait a minute, you've just said exactly what you need to hear. And all you need me to do is to parrot it back to you. And I felt
Mhm.
so uncomfortable. But I saw the relief on her face and I was like, oh, like I misunderstood something. You helped me understand it. And now we're up through it. I feel very confused. Like, can you say
Yeah.
something about like what is that process for you to say, hey, I need to hear exactly these three things to help me feel loved or safe or whatever the emotional payoff is?
Yeah, so I definitely am somebody who my friends come to for advice, so I always have all this, like, great advice, so when it's me going through something, even though it's in my head, like, the exact words I need to hear are right there, but I just can't say 'em to myself. There's, like,
Hmm.
just a disconnect there, and, with my current partner, he is, like, a problem solver, so if I'm having a problem, going through something, I'm feeling away, he wants to help me solve it, and I don't like that. I don't need my problem solved in those moments, and so, that's something I've had to say, "Hey, actually, I just need you to say, 'Yes, I see you.'" Like, I need, like, the simplest just if I'm crying and I'm saying, like, the "I'm the worst person in the world, I'm a horrible monster," or whatever, I don't want you to say, "No, how," like, I want you to just say, "I see you. I hear you. Yep. I know how you're feeling, like, that makes sense. That's valid." That's all I need to hear, and then I'm like, "Oh, I'm not going insane. Okay, that's what I needed." Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful tool to have in your arsenal. It's like, um, or even asking for consent, right? Which is like, oh, what's going on for you right now? Do you just want to be seen and heard? Would you like me to help brainstorm some solutions with you? And then letting you have the options, like, actually, I just need to moan for 10 minutes. Can I just moan? It's like, yes, moan, go
Mhm.
for it, right? But what a
Mhm.
beautiful gift to be able to give someone exactly what they need in that moment. I feel like that is in romantic partnerships in particular, that feels like such a powerful skill.
The first thing you said, definitely you're right about, something I've implemented with my friends recently with communication and my partner and even my mom is to say, "Hey, when I come to you with a problem, I'll always ask, like, do you have capacity for this right now? Like, do you have the capacity for me to come to you with something?" And if they say yes, I will tell you. Or you can ask me, like, "Do you need to just vent and you just need me to listen, or do you need advice or problem solving?" And so going into that has been really helpful because if I need to just have someone listen, that I can explicitly say that and they won't feel weird about it because I've already told them in the past that I need that.
Hmm.
You said consent and communication and just asking people questions. I think people are scared to ask each other these questions because they don't want again, for them to read into their questions, like, "Are you really asking me this?" But I think really m most autistic people, we're not really reading into what you're saying usually, so I'd rather people just outright ask.
I'm sometimes curious if this intersects with our masking abilities, right? If you say something to me that I don't understand, like out in the real world, like in a supermarket, if somebody says something to me that I don't understand, I go, "Oh God, I forgot to run my human software." right? I forgot to
Yeah.
be human. And that comes up first. And so, like, even just being able to clarify a question or feeling like I have the space to, like, oh, I don't have to understand everything. I can be wrong, or I can be like, it's okay to ask for more info. What a powerful skill to learn with your partner. And then the wild thing is, of course, you need this skill the most when emotions are heightened, but
Mhm.
that's not the right time to introduce them, right? So it's like a two-step process of like, hey, the next time something comes up, can we try this other thing? And I feel
Yeah.
like maybe that's where couples counselors can be really good. Or did you guys discover these types of tools separately?
Little of both. We're chronically online, and so we're constantly sending each other Instagram videos, and we both our algorithm for both of us has a lot of couple therapy things, and we have a shared saved folder. I really recommend
Mhm,
couples do this. We when we send each other or see a video that we're like, "I wanna try this with you. This is a good idea for us to try," we put it in the saved folder. And then maybe like during the weekly check-in is a good time to bring it up. Like, is there anything we didn't try? Oh, we saw this melting hug is good for intimacy. Let's try that. It's like
mhm,
we'll just do it through sending each other videos and typing it out. And then we don't have to say it face to face. We can think about it, process what the person said. And then at our weekly check-in, we can discuss it face to face. So we don't
mhm.
always bring things up face to face. Which I think a lot of couples therapists would probably say that's bad. But it works for us. So,
And so what does that look like? Do you guys sit in rooms next to each other and send video messages to each other? Or
well, we have separate bedrooms. So most of our scrolling, I would say, is done like when you first wake up or at night, which is the worst time to scroll. Don't do that.
right.
But that is when we scroll. So I would say we're usually in separate rooms when we're just doing our Instagram scrolling or whatever. So that, yeah, when that happens.
So it sounds like that is a specific tool you found that works well for you. Do you have other like tools or scripts or boundaries or things where you're like, oh God, I wish people knew this?
I would reiterate the one about asking your partner or saying, "Hey, I sense this kind of tone that's to me was perceived as you're angry. Can you confirm, like, are you feeling angry?" That is like a game changer.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
So how do you handle the situations where you feel like, so the other person can ask, but what if you notice that you are being misunderstood mid communication?
I would say that's what we're working on the most right now,
Hmm.
because that is a difficult one, for both of us. And again, this I think is widely common. We hate being misunderstood. And that is what we're working on right now because it's really easy in those moments to get defensive or to get like immediately point fingers and say, "You're not understanding me right now. You're misunderstanding my tone." Instead of kind of saying, "Okay, maybe I can try to say it in a different way."
Yeah. No, I love that. I think it's a really helpful tool. Do you feel like there's a thing in common with communication challenges with holistic people, like in work context or out in the world? Is it like something that people consistently misunderstand?
So I have like issues with auditory processing. So it happens to me a lot that I have to ask people to repeat themselves because I didn't understand what they said. And I'm also English is not my first language. So a lot of times I need to ask people to repeat themselves. And I've found that people will just keep saying it the same way over and over, which I can't process it unless you change the words. It's another thing my
Right,
partner and I do. And so when you ask someone to repeat themselves like twice, they get annoyed. So I honestly
right,
feel like I go into a lot of conversations and they start off that way. And so the person's annoyed with me from the beginning of the conversation. And I feel like
right.
I don't have much of a chance after that because they're already annoyed and think I'm like just not listening to
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Oh, you just said so many things that made my brain excited. How old were you when you learned English?
Small. I learned it in school.
Yeah. Yeah, so English is also not my first language, and I am curious about the intersection between language and autism. It makes for some really interesting things about audio processing and that kind of stuff, right? Sometimes I can sit there and go like, I don't understand a word you're saying. Oh, I'm trying to listen for the wrong language. If I switch
Mm,
to English or if I switch to one of my other languages, like, oh, now everything makes sense. It's like,
yeah.
well, shouldn't my brain be doing this automatically? It's so silly.
Right. That and I would say the even though we know all the words and the vocabulary in English, let's say as a second language, we learned it like really well, the sayings that are really location based, depending on where you live, the local sayings are hard for us in any language. So, let alone in a different language and different culture than our parents' culture,
Yeah.
let's say. So, I struggle a lot sometimes too with a saying, and I'm like, did that mean they hate me? And it's like, no, that was a nice thing for. I'm
Right.
like, I have no idea. Yeah,
I feel like a lot of the advice that I keep hearing about communication for autistic folks is actually because, like, effectively masking autistic people are essentially impossible to pick out of a lineup, right, at a restaurant or whatever. But people are familiar with other disabilities. So sometimes I'm like, sorry, I'm hard of hearing. Could you say that again in different words? Right. And then actually prompt what people need has been a very helpful tool for me. Because 90% of the time, my auditory processing is fine. But the last 10%, I'm a mess. Like
yeah.
if there's a if there's a cash register anywhere in the building, I can't pay attention to what this person is saying. And I'm like, well, that feels like that isn't how my brain should work.
I was gonna say about that. I think regarding masking, I think a lot of high masking autistic people don't realize that unmasking can cause skill regression. And that includes communication skills, social skills, all that. And uh it's just a good reminder that, like you said, if you're really high masking and you're doing so successfully, people will just never know. But once you start working on unmasking in your private life and you might have skill regression about communication and social skills, now when you're masking again, it's not as effective anymore. And
Yeah.
you might struggle. That's been my experience for sure.
Do you ever go nonverbal or does your partner?
My partner definitely does. Like, he shuts down and yeah. I definitely have shutdowns, but, I used to have shutdowns a lot and, like, could not speak before I started unmasking. Whereas actually, as of unmasked, I have more meltdowns than shutdowns now, because I feel more free to express and
Mhm.
release those feelings and emotions outwardly instead of having to like shut them in. So I actually don't have those situations as often anymore where I can't speak.
Mm. Ugh, that just gave me chills. I very much recognize what you're saying there.
Yeah.
So when your partner has a shutdown or a nonverbal stretch, do you guys have a way of communicating so you know he's okay?
Yeah, because the first time it happened, it was scary for me because yeah, didn't know what he needed from me. Because again, everybody it's different. Everybody will need something different in that moment. I don't like to be touched when I'm overwhelmed in those moments, whereas he wants to be hugged. But I
Mhm.
didn't know that at first. So yeah, we've definitely had to have conversations when he's regulated about, okay, when that happens and you can't communicate what you need from me in that moment, can you tell me now what you think you will need? And we can try and experiment. And I mean, every time that he has a meltdown or a shutdown, I'm still learning. So it's still every time a new opportunity for me to learn better what he needs.
The topic of this podcast episode is communication, right? And you're describing like A plus plus black belt communication there. Because if you never have a conversation with your partner about what you need when you're in a meltdown or in some sort of emotional extreme, that's like a recipe for things going horribly wrong.
Yes, I know that personally. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you practice like active listening skills? Is that something that you have been working on?
Yeah, I've been practicing that for a long time, not that I'm perfect at it, but I've been practicing that for a long time, whereas, I think my partner didn't know that existed or that was a thing, until recently, so we've been working on that together and listening without getting defensive and without feeling attacked,
Hmm.
because, I mean, a lot of neurodivergent people have trauma from parents and caregivers not listening to us, not understanding us.
Hmm.
And so it can be triggered with our partners when we feel those feelings. It triggers our traumas from childhood from not feeling heard and understood. Um, so yeah, it's really important to try to, in those moments, as much as possible, stop and say, okay. Another thing we do when we get triggered is stop and say, okay, I'm feeling triggered. And we'll ask each other, when's the first time you felt like this? What
Hmm.
you're feeling right now, when was the first time you felt that way? And it's like, "Oh, when I was a kid and this happened." Okay, I'm gonna remind you that you're not a kid anymore. That's not happening right now. We tell each other, that there is no saber-toothed tiger. when we're panicking. They were like, your fear is this response that we developed from when we needed to run from saber-toothed tigers. But it's like right now, there's no saber-toothed tiger. There's no immediate threat.
The
So
house cat is looking grumpy, but other than that, we're good.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
There's a really good book about active listening that I found a little infantilizing. Didn't love it, but the actual content. It's a very short book called "I Hear You" by Michael Sorensen, and it's literally just about how to repeat back what people are saying to you and engaging more deeply that way. And when I first started doing it, I felt like such a fraud. I was like, this is like what I am doing in communication is so much more advanced than this. But of
Mm,
course, that is advanced for me, not for the other person. They have no idea what's
right.
happening in my mind. And what I realized, and it made me such a better interviewer too. Like I've been working as a journalist for a long time, but just noticing when somebody's telling a story, the story has 3 points in it, and one of them they got a little bit more excited about. Well, that's the one you ask about, right? And it's from a really basic back and forth communication
Yeah.
thing, like keeping the conversation going. I don't know about you, but I often just kind of go, "Yep, I ran out of questions, you ran out of questions, and now we're just sitting here silently."
Yeah.
um, and I think like having a good active listening practice can be such a good way to, yeah, to have more meaningful and deeper conversations.
That's a good point. Yeah.
What does that look like for you? Like, how do you notice that somebody's actively listening to you and your story in that moment?
So I grew up with a lot of like politeness culture. Um, and I was taught like what is a polite thing to do, to have good manners. And so for me, I can't, I've tried to actually undo it and it's just natural for me. But when somebody's talking to me, I nod my head along to let them know I'm listening. But not everybody does that. And at first that was shocking to me because especially I think Americans maybe aren't taught that. I haven't seen it as much here. People just stone faced look at you. And
Right.
that was the issue with my partner. At first I'd be like monologuing all my feelings and he's just like this. And I'd be like, wait, pause. Are you like are you here? And he's like, yeah, I'm listening. But I'm like, I'm used to a more engaged, like giving physical assurance that I'm listening, and I'm
Right.
engaged. But some people just that's not natural for them, and I've also
Yeah,
had
yeah,
to
yeah.
unlearn that that is the only way people are listening. They could be actively listening and not be showing you that outwardly.
There's something there about cultural difference, right? And I think the interesting thing about politeness culture, like I have mixed feelings about it, but it is a very clear script, right? And as an autistic person, when I'm given a script, I'm like, thank you. I
Right.
just follow the script and everything works out great,
Yeah.
And it's been, in a way, it's a blessing because it's a really clear set of expectations, which I love.
Mhm.
But also, it's a mask. Like it's a mask that somebody else handed to me, and it's such an interesting thing to navigate on a day to day basis.
I think people who have lived in different countries and even parts of countries, like you get to see all those different cultures and how they practice whatever politeness is there. Like currently living
Mhm.
in almost like the northern US, people here are not polite the way they were when I lived in the South. Um, and to me, it was really shocking when I said hi to my neighbors and they didn't say hi back. I was like, "What? You're not gonna bring me cookies?" Like I'm like, "Are we not gonna be best friends?" Um, so I had to get used to like, okay, here in their culture, they don't have to say hi to you to be kind to you. And kindness,
Mhm.
niceness are two different things. You can be
Mhm.
nice and not kind to someone and vice versa. And again, that's my brain is like, oh, if you're nice to me, you must be a good person and I can trust you. And if I can't trust you, I've had to undo all that in the last couple of years. Like, no, no, no. What people are showing you is not always really who they are, basically.
Totally. Well, and that's them masking too, right? I mean, that is true for any number of pathologies, but it's also true for just humans in life, I think. Do you feel like there's certain social norms or nonverbal clues or what have you that are particularly challenging for you to interpret? For me, it's the phone. Like, I am glad that I can see your face. So when you're thinking, I could just, oh, I could just leave you to think. That's fine. But if
Mm,
you're on a phone and you just go quiet, I'm like, oh God, did I lose the connection? Do you hate
yeah,
me? Am I doing the
that's a
wrong
good
thing?
point.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I feel like almost the opposite because I learned how to mask so well and communicate in a passive aggressive way, sometimes when you're looking at people's faces, I would be trying to read into their face and like, what is their expression saying? And, me, like a lot of autistic people as a teenager became obsessed with psychology, human behavior, and like how to see when people are lying, like all these things, trying to understand human beings. But
Yep.
that actually led me to just be hyper vigilant and like paranoid about I saw a little change in their facial expression. Are they lying or do they hate me? Are they mad at me now? And so I would call out and say, "Hey, are you upset?" And they're like, "No, why?" I'm like, "Your face did this thing." So I
Right.
actually feel like in the last few years, phone conversations for certain types of conversations, um, I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry
Mm,
about trying not to read into their face. Um, I can just try to interpret their voice. So it's kind of easier.
yeah. No, I love that. I have one friend who I suspect is autistic who often closes his eyes when he speaks. And it is really unsettling to have a conversation with someone who has their eyes closed for me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I realized, wait, that is about me. Like he's looking after himself and
Right.
he's one of the smartest people I know in the
Mm.
world. And so I'm like, oh, this is so fascinating. Like I am uncomfortable by what I'm perceiving as his lack of masking. I was like, what the hell is that? That is such weird, multi-layered, internalized bullshit.
Right. Yeah. I think eye contact is definitely a big one for us in communicating. And um, I think in almost every culture, it is the polite thing to make eye contact. And if you don't make eye contact, it's seen as rude and not polite.
Hmm.
I think, yeah, part of the unmasking is on learning that. And my partner and I, we recently had a video go viral. It was us talking at a restaurant, and I put music over it, so you couldn't even hear what we were saying, but you could clearly see that we were unmasked and that we were talking with our hand, like in a certain way that seemed aggressive. And that was the point of the video. Is like people think unmasked communication looks aggressive, but in the video, I'm not making eye contact with him as he's speaking to me because it helps me understand what I'm being told if I'm not looking at the person. So with my
Hmm.
partner, we often, when we're having discussions, when every therapist will say you should look into each other's eyes and make we do the opposite. When we're having, especially if it's uncomfortable, we're looking away from each other face to face, but just looking away.
Could you put words to what is it that is easier for you when eye contact is absent?
For me, it would be that there's no chance for me to misinterpret or misunderstand their facial expressions. And I also don't have to think about not doing that. I don't have to remind myself, like, don't read into what I can just listen. And
Mm.
it helps me really hear him out better.
Do you feel like you and your partner are now at a place where you're like, okay, we've got this communication stuff down pat, let's go? Or are there still learning edges and challenges that you're working on right now?
They're definitely is still in the works. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what your current edge is?
I don't know, but I'll throw in something interesting that we want to try and we keep postponing. We tried it once actually, but it is to when we are arguing to do something silly,
Mm,
like put on a funny hat or sunglasses to kind of lower like our walls and be like, okay, it's still me and we can still be silly and laugh for a second and go back to arguing. And so it diffuses some of the tension. We tried it one time with like socks in our hands and we were like, we had to talk like sock puppet like this. And it was just so funny and ridiculous that we realized at some point, like, I don't really feel like arguing anymore. like it,
right.
you know? So, it's something that keep meaning to try more and more. Yeah.
Always keep a sock puppet at hand.
Yeah.
I love that. Um, so I'm curious, you mentioned specifically about arguments and conflict and such, and like, how do you approach conflicts in your relationship and how like what makes the communication around that easier for you?
We both don't like conflict. It's triggering for both of us. But we also know that avoiding it and just holding things in, you're going to build resentment. So really it's taken years to find, I guess feel safe enough with each other to feel like
Mhm.
conflict is safe. Because if you don't feel safe with the person, conflict being already a scary thing, I think that's just a recipe for you to be panicking the whole time. And yeah, so
Yeah.
I think really we had to build that trust and safety with each other, which was hard at first. And now that we finally feel that we are emotionally safe space for each other, that we can fully be vulnerable, then conflict doesn't feel as scary because we know, like, we approach it as a team. We try to do the, like, it's not me versus you, it's us versus the problem. So we try as much as possible when we bring up a conflict and we're arguing to still argue for the same side. Like, how can we beat this problem?
You can find yourself in a really beautiful, virtuous spiral there, because if you are feeling safe, it is more likely that you're able to be more vulnerable. If you're more vulnerable, that helps inspire more intimacy. And with the additional intimacy, as you go through a couple of loops through that, yes, you are in conflict, but you're learning to trust each other in a really profound way, is what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it starts with just trying, just opening up to each other, and just little by little, like you said, you're kind of gonna feed into this cycle the more you just practice that vulnerability.
If there's one piece of advice that you could give to somebody who's autistic around communication.
As scary as it is to try to advocate for yourself and really make your needs clear and give the person the opportunity to honor your needs or not. And then you'll know if that's somebody that you want in your life, or how do you proceed from there. But at least give them that chance, give people the opportunity to meet you where you're at and try to meet them where they're at. And more often than not, when you say, hey, here's what I need from you, people are willing to meet you somewhere. Pushing past the scariness of expressing your needs is usually worth it.
That's really good advice. Thank you.
How do you handle it when somebody else's communication needs are pretty different from yours?
It depends on who the person is. I'll be honest, where I'm at in my journey is that if I have a friend that is unwilling to compromise and honor my needs around communication at all, then I'm just not going to be their friend anymore, because I
Hmm.
just, it's like damaging to have people in my life like that. But with family members, you can't always just cut them off. So that's definitely a struggle I have with my parents and us having different communication styles. But I've just laid it out for them and said, this is how I communicate when I'm unmasked. I'm trying to unmask more. So, like, you're going to hear me communicate like this and this. I had to tell my mom, like, if you think that it's like you sense a tone, you think what I'm saying sounds like I'm upset, please ask me instead of assuming. And she's done a good job at it. But sometimes it's going to be different and you can't meet each other anywhere. And I just have to try to see it from their perspective and understand, like, why they're communicating the way they are. And usually, if you can kind of understand their side of it, you can not take it personal. I try to not take things like that personal.
In situations where you can do that, like where I get scared is situations where you don't really have control. Like, I don't know, going to the DMV or
Yeah.
getting pulled over by police, or like situations like, hey, your communication style, I understand why it is the way it is, really isn't working for me.
Mhm.
But like, I don't have the rapport or the influence to be able to influence the communication style that's going on. I had to go to a courthouse the other day and I was just so fantastically overly polite to everyone. It was a delight. It was an absolute delight. But
Mhm.
of course, I was masking to the eyeballs
Yeah.
because I'm like, this is the only way I know how to get through
I just
this.
cry in those situations. I just cry, and that works for me.
I
I'm
mean,
a big supporter of crying as a
yeah.
means of letting energy out. Um, but I cry that out, and it's like
Mhm.
I've literally felt myself feeling somebody's energy when they were in a bad mood and they were yelling, and then I'll cry, and then I feel better. So it's like you need to release that energy. So I
Yeah.
cry in public. I cry at the DMV. I cry at the airport almost every time I fly. Like, I cry in public in front of those people, and I don't care about it.
Obviously, it's a form of self regulation, right? But do you also
Mhm.
feel it's communication? Are you communicating something as you're crying?
If somebody has a communication style that made me cry, usually no, they aren't going to have
Right.
empathy suddenly when I start crying.
Right. That
Often
makes sense.
actually makes them communicate more aggressively, which is fine.
Is it fine?
I mean, it's not, but
I mean, it's fuck all
can't.
you can do about it. So
Yeah, like
I guess,
I can't be the person that gets them to see that it's not fine. So, you
right.
know?
I know.
Yeah.
I know that all too well.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming and talk to me about this. You've had so many amazing points, and I can't wait to share this with our listeners. I think it's going to be amazing. I've got a couple of questions that I like to close out every interview with. And the first one is, what do you wish people would understand about autism?
I wish people understood that autistic energy levels, emotionally and physically, fluctuate every day. So I think a lot of people say, well, I don't know, this person's autistic. They seem so fill in the blank. But it's like, unless you live in our brains and our physical bodies, you can't know.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you. And finally, can you tell me a story of a time when you were seen and loved in exactly the right way for you?
Oh, let me think about that. Good question. So recently, I've been not leaving my house a lot because I live in a big city now. So the last couple of years, and it's literally scary for me to leave home sometimes. And I've made a friend that I express this to, and he's fully aware that like leaving home doesn't feel safe for me currently. And so when I do I'm kind of my nervous system's activated. And recently, I texted him and told him I'm going through a lot of stuff, and I wanted to talk to him. And when he could have just called me or texted me about it or said, "Hey, come over, let's go out, let's go for some drinks," he immediately was like, "I'm gonna come over. What flavor do you want? What toppings do you want on it?" And brought over French fries, which is like my favorite food, milkshakes. Came over, sat on the chair, made sure he sat on the chair. That's a sign for outside clothes, because he knew like I'm going through a tough time, and it would make it worse if I have to leave, choose what to have for dinner, have you sit on my couch. Like he really accommodated in every single way to what I needed without me even having to say it, which tells me he pays attention to when I expressed these needs in the past. So that made me feel very, very seen and loved.
Thank you so much. I love that.
Yeah.
Where can people find you online if they want to stay in touch?
Yeah. I'm on Instagram as Sofi, Sofix Elkin, Elkin. And on TikTok.
I'll make sure to drop both of those in the show notes so people can find you.
Cool.
Thank you so much for taking the time. This was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you as well.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. You can find us on TikTok on Autistic FM, on Instagram at autistic_FM, and on the web on autistic.fm. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Haje Kamps. If you know anybody who would be a great guest for this podcast, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can email us on hello@autistic.fm or reach out via the socials. See you next week.